Hello everyone, welcome to another Inkarnate live stream. Today we're going to be creating an Elven city with the fantasy regional style. And we're going to be making the city on a waterfall, so I'm really excited about that. Now if you want to follow along in today's stream, go ahead and direct your attention over to the chat. You'll go ahead and see that there's a link for you to go ahead and clone and edit the map so you can follow along. And I'm super excited about this. We're going to be putting emphasis on layering because when you're working with regional, layers are going to be super important. We're also going to be focusing on process. We're going to be focusing on the proper type of blending with texturing, light and shadow, and so much more. So please stick around, okay? All right, let's just go ahead and jump right in, not waste any time. Now, as always, when you first start with Inkarnate, it's always nice to have some kind of process. That meaning a step-by-step process that you have to help you to make the building or the map-making process smoother. Now, before you actually jump into the tool, it's best to have ask some questions about the civilization or the people that might be living in the city that you're making. Because we're making an Elven city, we need to know a little bit about that. So off screen, you're going to be coming up with things like what kind of race of people, what kind of habits do they have, culture, all these kind of questions. This is the pre-planning stage. Once you hop into the tool, then that first step is to sketch it out. Now, there are multiple ways to do sketching. You can use the path tool and just use different types of line colors to kind of sketch out what you want. If you're not familiar or comfortable with sketching your own on a thing, you don't really require a pen. A mouse works just fine, though a pen makes it easier. If you're not comfortable with your sketching, then use the watercolor city styles to make a very small model. It's going to be top down, of course, but that small mini model can be really helpful for you to kind of get the general idea. It's really hard to start building right away, but kind of just going in blind. So that either a mini model from watercolor cities or sketching with the path tool, whichever one you want works best for you, but going in blind makes it so much harder. So even just having a reference image of any kind is going to be totally helpful. So it's up to you, okay? Hey, first time chatter, welcome. So now once you've kind of put down, let's go with the sketch here. Let's keep going. Let me go ahead and move this out of the way. I'm going to explain a little bit about the sketch so that you kind of know what I made here. So let's go ahead and move our process out of the way. Those reddish, the red is going to represent kind of land. Right here, we're going to create waterfalls. So the sketch for me is just the terrain. Don't worry about putting together buildings and stuff. You just want something to help with terrain because terrain is going to be that first step, right? Once you start putting stamps together. So the red represents land. These are going to be islands. This is all land right here. And that blue, everything that's not red in between here and everywhere else, that's going to be water. And the way that I want this to be is that there's a lake right up here in the top right. And then also there's probably going to be a wall right here that's going to make sure that that lake water doesn't go too fast as it approaches the waterfall so that the city there's not going to be too much erosion and the boats that are going to be in that area aren't going to just fall off. And I also want to put in here is where the main city is going to be. This is where all our structures are going to be. And then I might put some megastructures or larger structures on this part of the land right here, over here and over here. So those will probably be the general setup that I'm going to be working with. Okay. So now that you kind of have that guide up, we should next try to put down the terrain using stamps. Now, what I'm going to be doing first is just doing a quick demo on how to put together your waterfall stuff. So let's turn on the demo real quick and I'll kind of show you how I put this together. So when you're making a waterfall, you got to pay a special attention to layers, especially when you're using fantasy regional. Okay, so it's super important. So place down one karst. This thing right here is a karst. You can find it in fantasy regional, K-A-R-S-T, karst. Make sure that this is on like layer -4, layer -5, whichever one it is, right? That's the first step. It's just put down one karst. And this is going to be the BG, okay? Because this is going to be in the background. We're going to put stamps in between, in front of this stamp, as well as other stamps on top of that. So this is where that layering comes in. Next, you'll put down a waterfall, and you'll make sure it's a layer above the karst. So that's why it's in front of it. So let's say this would be it. I'm going to put this not at layer -3, but -2, because in the next step, you kind of notice that behind the waterfall, there's still the karst right there. Now that's frustrating, right? So the trick to that is to actually use a clipping mask to hide something. So if I open up this waterfall demo right here, and I go in right here, and I want to grab out of the catalog a clipping mask. The kind of clipping mask you want to get for this is the one with the soft edge. Okay, I'm going to put that stamp down right here. You'll notice that it's above. Let's keep pushing it down until where the waterfall is above. There you go. Now, if you're not sure what a clipping mask is, clipping masks are going to pick up whatever's on the FG layer. They're great for hiding things. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm using this clipping mask for. I want to hide the karst behind the waterfall. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that my entire map is actually on the FG layer, so that when I paint over the FG layer, it will also paint over the clipping mask. Okay, so those clipping masks are super helpful. We want to put in as many as you need to hide the karst. Okay, that's the trick. You have to make sure that the clipping masks are in front of the karst, but the waterfall is in front of the clipping masks. Then you'll make them really you'll stack as many waterfall pieces as you really need. Okay, make it as wide as you want. And then you can also add a plateau rock. Just remember the layering. So for instance, see that I have a plateau rock right here. Just make sure that the waterfall behind it is literally a layer behind it, and the waterfall in front of it is a layer in front of the plateau rock. Okay, so this is how you're going to put together some more realistic waterfalls. The last step is to connect the end of the waterfall, right? You need another karst that's going to be in front of, so notice there's another karst in front of this one. You notice that it's a layer in front of the waterfall, that last waterfall on the right, okay? So this is why layering is so important. Otherwise, it's going to look really weird. Now, the other things that I added on here was that I used something called cloud stamps, and you can use any cloud stamp you want. I recommend that you at least drop the saturation down to 0 so that it's white, and drop the opacity. And mist or clouds work great because if you want to show that the water is falling down and creating this mist, then throw down clouds or mist at the base. And I've also used a stamp called Sparks from Fantasy Battle Maps that kind of also gives it a nice splashy kind of feel to it, like there's more mist. So those are the last kind of details to make your waterfall look really interesting. So this is the method that we use to put together the waterfalls. Now that you've seen a mini model of how I've put that together, let's see what that looks like in the macro when I make it much larger. Okay, so I'll go ahead and turn off that. And we'll go on to how exactly to put together the other part. Let me go ahead and delete these paths here. And what I do is I'm going to leave the sketch up so that I have it there to work with. And you're going to notice that I've just deleted a giant rug that was covering my layers. Don't worry about that. When it comes, we'll get to texturing, and all this big giant texture mess that you see right here will make more sense. I save texturing for later so that I know when I put down stamps first, I'll kind of have an idea of what textures to use, what kind of palette of textures to use once the stamps are down, okay? So what I'll also do is I'll just drop the opacity of the sketch, and that way I can still see it, and then I can start putting things down. Now, the first thing when I'm doing it is, remember I mentioned that having a karst in the background and having a karst in the foreground. So we'll start with the background first. This is where there's going to be some karsts here, and I'll even put a karst right here to split the waterfall in half. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that first one, which is going to be the terrain BG. I'm going to work moving from the back, moving forward. So moving in the BG, or what I'm designating as the background area, and then move forward. So I'll put and add the stamps down here. You'll see that I added karsts, and I also used the clipping masks right here to hide the karsts so that you can't see them, right? use the clipping masks right here to hide all of this part of the karst. Okay? Same thing here. So clipping masks, totally your friend. Absolutely use them. And then of course, I'll also want to put down some of my FG layer. So let me go ahead and open that up real quick and we'll go to that. Shadows, where is my terrain BG, terrain FG, okay? And that means the karsts that are going to be in the front. Now that layering process is important too, because what happens if you put down a stamp right here and you want it to be behind the karst, right? Then you'll want to make sure that it's a layer behind this group of karsts right here. So I can't stress to you how important layering is, okay? Now that we kind of get the general idea about what's going on with the sketch, we can go ahead and kind of just remove it. I don't really need it anymore. I kind of memorize a little bit where my islands are going to be. And just, you know, when you're working the sketch, don't worry about making an art piece. Just put some scribbles down there so you have a guide, okay? If you're spending too much time trying to make the sketch, then you're not making a sketch. You're trying to make an art piece. So focus on just making it simple and easy. It's just a guide. Okay, so next, I'm going to go ahead and put down in the list here that we've done the terrain. I forgot to mention the scale, and I'll make sure to mention the scale right now. So with scale, well, now that we've got the terrain down, we want to decide just how big my city is. The population of your city is really going to be determined by, you know, the culture, the race of people, their history. So for this, I've decided that the elves are, I'm going to take some references from The Witcher. I'm going to say that these elves have been hunted by maybe humans or dwarves or other species like a pogrom to have them removed. So their numbers are dwindling. So we'll have I'm only going to have a small population. And the way that I kind of decide population is going to also determine the scale of your stamp. Now I want about 5,000 plus. And I'm going to have each structure have 150 plus elves. That's their capacity. And the reason why I have a high number like that is because these elves are communal. They share their space, they share food, they share their domiciles. They live together in kind of a communal way. And so it's okay for me to go ahead and decide then that these buildings can carry a lot more people than, let's say, a human city that prefers the privacy of their own homes. Maybe elves have no issue with sharing each other's space with each other. Not a problem. So if it's 150 elves per structure, and then I kind of want to figure out how many structures I'm going to put down, 5,000 divided by 150, it's going to be about 33.3 structures. Now, once you've got that part figured out, now you can kind of figure out scale, okay? Now, if you open up and you kind of notice this stamp is at 100%, right? This gives you an idea of how much smaller or how much bigger your stamp needs to be depending on the size of your city. So if you're making a small settlement where there's only maybe a dozen buildings, 100% works just fine. But if you want to make a massive city that's got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of people, then of course you're probably going to have to scale it way, way down. Okay? So if you want a large population of people, you have to bring the scale way down because then you have to fit more structures. If you're making a big one, then just scale the stamp up. So that's really the rule, okay? I'm going to go with a scale that's in between 35 and 30. So I'll set it to, let's say, 35. This is about the size that I'm going to be using right here. So it's actually still, that stamp is quite big, so it's not going to be a massive city. So now that you kind of get the idea of how population works, we can kind of go on to the next step. So let's go ahead and move on to the walls. We've done the terrain. Now we want to do the walls. And I remember I said I wanted to put a wall near the end. I was thinking a wall would go nice right here. This wall would make sure that lake's waters don't move too quickly, so that boats don't fall off the ledge or it doesn't cause mass erosion on the islands in which these elves live on, right? So we'll go ahead and put a wall in there. And let me quickly turn that on here. So we have a wall here. And notice that I'm using stamps from the Elven style. or from the Elven pack. So if I go into the catalog and you'll see Fantasy Regional is open, you go click HD Elves. And what I like to do is go to that hamburger menu in the top right corner and just say expand all assets so that I can see everything that I'm working with elves, okay? So I like a lot of these curved Elven circular walls. These are perfect. We're going to be using those. We're going to be using a lot of the Elven buildings here. There's some towers here and other nice pieces. So we're going to be using most of these. We might use some other stamps outside of the Elves pack, but for now, let's try to use those particular ones, okay? All right, so I've created, if you look over here, I've got this nice wall here, and then in an opening, I'll probably put a dockyard in between those two wall pieces right there. So, and maybe a watchtower, because some kind of defense would be nice. Though this city is pretty well defended by itself. You'd have to scale these karsts. Any army would have a difficult time scaling these karsts, or even if they wanted to take the lake entrance to get in, it still would be extremely difficult to raid larger ships because there's going to be islands that are getting in the way. So this location is well defended. Natural defenses, as well as that wall that you see, that's going to be great. So now we'll go ahead and focus on some of the mega structures. So I've done the walls. Let's go ahead and make the communal halls. These are going to be like the larger structures that are going to rest on the karsts. And that way we kind of have these mega structures that are going to be important. Now, if you're ever confused about what kind of structures, what kind of blocks, what kind of things, when it comes to cultural buildings, when it comes to infrastructure, a lot of it has to do with the environment or the geography that you're around, okay? So since this is a lot of water on this map, expect a lot of infrastructure around fishing, right? The society might be pescatarian. So they eat whatever foraging things they can find in these karsts, as well as the fish that are inside the lake. So that's going to be important. So now I know there's probably going to be some fisheries. There's probably going to be some kind of silo or something that's going to store fish or salt that can. There's going to be water mills probably to process whatever grains or flowers or whatever kind of crop they might have, or from foraging. There's obviously going to be maybe the religion is going to be focused around something to do with the water, right? Maybe because the fish are bountiful, maybe there's going to be some professions around that. Fishers, maybe there's a water priestess, maybe there's a water master that kind of keeps track of the water speed, checks the erosion of the islands. So knowing what kind of structures and what kind of culture, religion, it's all going to be about really the environment that you're in. So again, because this is a waterfall, because there's a lot of water, expect a lot of the religious iconography, the religion to be based around waterfall, the waterfalls, the water itself, all those kind of things. So that kind of helps you to understand what structures to add. And so I do have kind of a list of structures. I want to have a feast hall because I want my elves to have a place to sit all together communally and eat. I want to have a library. I want to have a castle, or maybe some kind of massive castle that's a garden of like a place of solitude, a place of thinking where elves can go, a theater. We're going to have infrastructure like a smithy, a mason, water mills, a water master, dockyards, grain silos, or a place to put fish stock. And we're going to have a mage academy as well. And maybe the mage academy has a lot to do also with water magic or forest magic, whatever it might be, right? So those structures are going to be super important. So we're going to start with those larger communal halls, like I said, that are going to be on the karsts. So we'll open up the communal halls. And the first one's going to be the castle, which I'm going to put on top of this. Let me see here. It's not opening up. 1 second. There we go. So the first one I'm putting up is going to be a castle that I'm going to put on this karst that I put in the center. This kind of cuts the water. This kind of cuts the waterfall in half. There's a structure, an important structure that should be perched on top of that karst. So I used some of the stamps from the elves pack. So I put a castle there. We're also going to have like a feasting hall. We're going to have I believe this one is a theater, so where elves can go. Kind of everyone has a theater, has some kind of culture with entertainment, entertaining themselves. And then we'll have a library over here. And all of these large mega structures all have dorms attached to them. So if you want to stay for a week at the library, you totally can. Why check out the book when you can just check into the library, right? So yeah, having a communal things attached to all these mega structures, I think, is important to the overall communal structure of the society. And then we're going to go into making some rocky islands as well. And I'm going to show you how I put together these rocky islands. We'll do a demo, so that way you're not confused, because a lot of people were saying, well, hey, you just put this layer back to 100% opacity, and you didn't really explain how I did it. So I want to make sure that I explain how I put things together so that you're not confused. So let's go with this island demo. The first one is just to put down a brown mountain, okay? And that's going to be on a layer that's going to be below. Whenever you're constructing stamps, you build from the ground up, just like in reality, right? You build from the ground up. So first layer, make it a layer in the negatives. Layer -5 works fine. Put down a mountain. Then I'm going to put down some of these docks from the pirate pack. Guess what? All I did was just desaturate them so that way they're white, because I wanted those docks to stick within the same color palette with that white kind of marble or white stone that you see with that. So I went ahead and desaturated them to make sure that they were kind of this whitish color. Step 3, put the structure that you want. Make sure that the entrance is facing on top of the dock, those docks, so that way there's access into that building. Once you've done that, go another layer up and then place down your details. So whether it's a crane, because this is a dock, expect maybe some boat equipment, maybe some crates, barrels, some grain, these kind of things like that. So once you've placed all that together, then you can just group that, and then you'll do the same process with every island, using a different dock set, using a different dock stamp, using different types of structures, okay? So super important. So that's how you put together the island. So there's no confusion about how to put those together. So then I'll go ahead and take all of my rocky islands and just put them down so you can kind of see them all. Okay, so lots of different islands that I put together. What I did is I made one island at a time, grouped them, label it, and then put it off to the side, and then made about 5 or 6 of these little tiny islands with different configurations of docks. And then I just copied and pasted them, fitted them where I wanted them, okay? Each one of those islands is going to represent either a dorm for the elves to live, or some kind of infrastructure. All right, so for the first one, I've got this dockyard right here. And putting together this is not hard. Remember, you build from going upward. So you would build the docks first. Then you would I put a guard tower in the center of the dock. And then I also put that last bit, the details, right? All those little tiny people, all the different crates, barrels, all those things like that. So start really from the ground up, biggest to smallest, small being the details, right? So we're going to have a dockyard with a watchtower, so that way if there is any boats that try to sneak in, you'll have some kind of security, right? We've also got a water master. Let's go into infrastructure. There's a water master right here with a kind of a water clock right here. This clock is kind of put together where it uses the water to kind of keep track of time, right? Remember the culture, how you keep track of time, the religion, it's based around water. You're on a waterfall. So the speed of the water is what activates the mechanism for that clock. And I also want to mention that I used HSBC to make that clock have a green roof, okay? Because that's not the default HSBC setting. So you will have to change HSBC for some stamps to kind of match. This waterfall or this watermill right here, not the normal HSBC. Let me open it up. Okay, if I open this up right here, and you'll kind of notice that my hue is off a little bit. Let me go ahead and put it back. Hue is at this is the default. I had to take it to 100 to give that green feel that I was looking for. Not every stamp is going to be HSBC friendly to get the green you want, though I can say that if you have a red or orangish roof is the default color, it'll be so much easier to get your green color because red and green are complementary colors. So when you're using the hue slider, know that whatever has a little bit of red or has some nice red, you'll get some good greens out of that, okay? I want you to notice one other thing as well that I did to make sure that these buildings kind of pop out as well, is I added an object shadow. Now, Fantasy Regional already has shadows baked into it, and that's okay. But if you want to make the structures stick out more, you would use an object shadow. So let me go real quick into the Rocky Islands, and I want to show you. So I've selected this Elven building right here. See what happens when I turn off the object shadow. None. Okay? See, it doesn't quite pop out as much because there's no object shadow on it. So if you kind of want stamps to just pop out a little bit more from the texture behind it, which kind of makes sense because you'll notice that the water is blue and the roofs are green. So they don't pop out quite as much, but if you throw down that object shadow, it'll create that drop shadow behind it, causing it to pop out more, okay? This might not work with every stamp because when you're adding an object shadow, you'll also be intensifying the baked in shadow as well. So either using clipping masks or some kind of stamps to hide some of that shadow would be helpful, okay? All right, so there's the general idea when putting down. So all I did was just make a series of islands with different configurations and then copied and paste them all over that space right there. So it's easy to put together, and I've added a couple other things. There's a Mage Academy, there's the Watermaster, a Mason, there's that dockyard we started with, there's a smithy. So you have some of that basic infrastructure that's still there. It's not like it's gone, okay? All right, let's go to the next step of the process. Now that we've kind of put down most of that stuff, we can kind of add in the boats, right? How is it that people access all this stuff? It's through boats, okay? So I'll go ahead and just turn on the boat layer, and you'll see there's boats everywhere. Think of it as kind of a Venetian kind of setup, right? There's a lot of different boats, and I did the same trick. You'll notice that I put an object shadow to make sure that those boats really pop out, okay? Once you've put together your access, which is boats in this case, then we want to go on to the next step. We'll want to put down, how is it that I put together texturing, okay? Texturing can be confusing because some people get kind of confused about it, but I can show you a easy way to kind of put down your texturing and how you blend things together. The first step is putting down a base texture. Okay, the base texture is this deep sea green texture. Everything on the FG layer is painted with this color first, this texture first. Okay, you always start with your base texture first. Once you've put down your base texture, then you start to decide the variety of different types of ocean textures that you want to put on top of the base texture. And there are several reasons why you would do this. One, you want to create this illusion of maybe more depth. So notice that right here, I used this deep sea texture I painted underneath. Once I figured out where my mountains or where my islands were, I painted that deeper blue sea texture underneath to make it look like that's the submerged part underwater, okay? I also used that color to show depth in the water. I wanted this corner to be a little bit deeper, also contrast, because this part of this basin right here is lower than where the top of the waterfall is. So I used a deeper blue here and a lighter blue up here to kind of show that there's a height difference, okay? And then the last thing that I did was I used an alpha texture called snow, and that is actually in fantasy battle maps, and it works great for making turbulence. You notice here that I have these waterfall stamps right here. you know, you would kind of expect some white water or turbulence where water starts to really pick up momentum. So I made sure to paint that snow texture, alpha texture, at the base of the waterfall and also at the top of the waterfall as well to represent kind of that white water. This snow alpha texture does wonders. Use it, okay? If you want to show movement or action in the water, that's it. And these are the only 4 textures that I've actually used in the whole map. This whole map is only 4 textures, 3 different sea textures and 1 snow alpha texture. So it's actually not that complex, right? Start with your base texture first. The whole thing is painted with the base texture. Then you use the various types of textures to kind of create different layers and different contrast. And then to create a sense of movement with the waterfall, we use the alpha textures. So not hard, pretty easy to put together, right? So texturing is not complex. Just make sure that whenever you're doing any kind of blending of any kind, just set the opacity, that's up here, set that opacity to something like 30 or so, 23, 30, in that area, because blending requires multiple strokes. You're not going to get the perfect blend you want by doing 1 stroke and you're done. It will take multiple strokes to get the effect that you want, okay? So just keep that in mind, all right? And then the other thing you want to keep in mind is also you want to make sure that the softness is all the way up to 1, okay? You don't want your softness down because hard brushes a hard edge brush that has no softness does not work well for blending textures. So just keep that in mind. Make sure your softness is all the way up when you're doing it. Okay, let's go ahead and finish that up. Let's keep going. We're almost there. Just a couple more steps in the process. Let's go with our light and shadow. Now there are some fun tricks about creating depth and about creating a sense of depth to your map by adding light and shadow. And there's a couple ways that you can do it. I'm going to be doing a method where I'm just going to use light stamps the whole time to show how I put it together. So let's put down the lights. And what I want to do is I wanted to put down light sources that were on top, that are going to be touching the top of my most tallest structures. So putting a light source at the peak of your tallest structures helps it look like the sunlight is, that the top of these structures are being bathed in some of the light. That's helpful. Even if you don't have a specific light direction, if let's say that you want a directional one, you can just put light stamps on top of tall structures so that way they look like they pop up and they're higher up. The next trick that you can also do is you can take any one of those light stamps and set the brightness to 0, okay? And then you can place those stamps wherever you want them to create a shadow, okay? Just make sure that you drop the opacity, because if those stamps are at 100% opacity at a black, pure black, it'll probably hide too much information. And these are set to overlay. Light stamps are set to the blend mode overlay. So drop the opacity a little bit and place those light stamps, which are now dark stamps really, where you want them, okay? So the way that I'm kind of setting this up is I want my light source to be kind of going this way. So I'll make sure that the shadows are going to be on the left side of things, okay? That's kind of the trick that I'm going to be doing. You notice that I made sure that they're going to be there. So that will be helpful. And let's go ahead and add just a couple more shadows. I think there are a couple more shadows here. There's also a shadow that I'm going to apply to the walls here. And I also want to apply some shadows. I want to apply further shadows so that way I really get that sense of shadow and light. Okay, those kind of things help to really, really make it pop out more. So light and shadow are super important. Pick a direction that you want the light source to be. If you don't want to go through all of that, then just put some simple light stamps on the top of your tallest structures to make sure that they look like they're bathed in light, whichever direction that they're in, okay? That last step in the process is going to be adding filters. Filters are super important. Filters are going to give you, are going to kind of create some cohesion, kind of make the stamps pop out more. They can do a lot. So let's go ahead and go through the various textures that, or filters that we have. Let's go ahead and just turn them all off, and we'll go through kind of each one and what they end up kind of doing to the map. Okay? And there's a variety of ones that I recommend that you use. That first one is I wanted to show that there was a light source, so I used the God rays. Now that I know where the directional shadow is, it made it easier to where my shadows will be and where my light sources will be. So helpful to have the God rays. Next, I threw down kind of a vignette set to a kind of color burn. It's kind of actually not really that visible now that I kind of look at it, so it might not even be important. The next one is going to be a color filter, which is cold warm, and that's kind of giving a purplish feel to the water. And I made sure that that filter was on -5, so only the water would be affected. So watch what happens when I push that filter all the way up. You see, it makes the whole thing purple. But if I push it down to like layer -5, it's only going to make the whatever at the bottom layers that color. So play around with layering different layers when you're putting down filters to see the interesting effects that you get. What's really fun is just to open up a map that you already made and just start fiddling around with filters. And you might find a series of really nice combinations that look really nice. So I put cold, warm. You could use whatever color filter you want to kind of make sure that the stamps all kind of come together properly. That last one is going to be clarity. And the clarity, of course, just kind of sharpens things and just makes things pop out more. So yes, that's it. So I'll quickly just review the process so that you remember what we do here. You build the sketch first. Doesn't matter if you want to make a mini model with the watercolor city style. Just remember that don't go overboard with the mini model. Just make the terrain just to make it basic. Or just sketch it with the path tool. Again, you don't need the mouse. Next, you're going to set your scale. I'm using population. So this just kind of helps me to decide the overall size of it, how many people live in it. Next, you'll put down the terrain. Remember, we did the demo with the karsts and the waterfalls, right? You put 2 karsts at a distance, make sure they're the proper layers, and then fill them in with waterfall stamps. And then from there, you can start adding all the details like sparks, smoke, or whatever it is you want to use for the mist, right? And then I put down that wall in the back. Remember, that wall was there for a specific reason. It was to slow down the water so that way it saves, it doesn't make too much erosion with the islands. And then we also added those communal halls which are on the actual karsts, the land itself. They're not in the water part. Oh, no problem, Blue Robin. Super glad that you are here, by the way. Okay. And then, of course, I put in my little tiny islands with my various different types of infrastructure and just dorms, just living quarters. And then, of course, you throw in your boats because, hey, there needs to be access. If it's on land, you need roads, right? If it's in the air, you need airships. If it's in the water, you need boats, right, to travel. If you're not using boats, then just make sure that you have all the docks connected to each other so people can travel from each domicile to each different island, all right? We're using boat travel for this one. Remember the texturing, and we only used 4 textures, right? So that's how easy it is, okay? It's not going to be every case. Sometimes you might use 20, okay? So remember, alpha textures are super important, okay? So make sure you use them. That snowy texture is great for white, rapid, for white water, okay? Light and shadow, use light stamps, both for the light and for the shadow. Okay, as the musical rogue mentioned, you can also use the path tool. It's up to you on how you want to do it. Light stamps might be a little bit easier as you're only doing one change. You're just changing the brightness to 0 and then the opacity. So 2 things. With the path tool, you might have to make a couple more changes. Do what's best for you. And you know, there's more than one way to do anything in Inkarnate. That's the beauty of it. We all learn and we all do things differently. So it's come up with a method that works for you and speeds up that process. That last one was filters, right? Filters made the stamps pop out more. Filters added some more texture. Filters made some things pop out more. So filters are super important. All right, well, hey, that's the end of the stream. Next week at 3 p.m. PST on Wednesday, I do believe it is going to be the top 10 city map fails. That is the most top 10 common mistakes that I see users make when they're working with the watercolor city style. Okay, and I know those are really popular videos, so expect more content like that in the future. All right, hey, thank you so much. Don't forget, you can clone and edit this map if you want to use it for yourself. I'll also be sure to make sure that the whole map in its entirety without all the extra guides and little process stuff on it. So that way, if you want to use this map for your own personal use, you totally can, okay? All right, hey, thank you so much. Please stay safe and healthy. Merry map making, and I'll see you next week. Auf Wiedersehen, my friends.